Let's start with an excerpt from the book, Urban Planning Analysis, Methods and Models. Knowledge about past populations and assumptions about future populations are fundamental to planning decisions in every aspect of community life. If we don't have a sense of size, composition, or spatial distribution of the future population, we cannot hope to plan for the needs of that population. To be a bit reductive, imagine planning dinner. You have a list of ingredients, but you have no idea if you have any of those things in your house, or how much of it you have, or even if you do have it, where in the house those things might be. There's no chance without that knowledge that you'd be able to make that dinner work. Having an idea about the past population will let you make an educated guess or a forecast of future populations, which, even when they are inevitably imperfect, at least give you a starting point to make those plans. Demography provides the detailed historic, contemporary, and future population information necessary in order to make these plans for a community's needs. While demography is quite important for planning in general, it is critical for infrastructure planning. As I mentioned earlier, indicators of development are directly or sometimes indirectly related to the size and structure of the population. Recall, more developed nations tend to have slower growing and older populations. Knowing more about the characteristics of the population, planners can better determine the level of service or supply of amenities that are or will be needed by the community. That level of service is provided by infrastructure and community facilities, the need for which, again, is dependent on the structure of the underlying population. If we know enough about the future population and the needs of that population, we'll be able to conduct feasibility analysis and cost-benefit analysis to assess the likelihood that a project built to exploit a public works opportunity involving revenues will find an adequate market. That is, population information is critical in determining if we build something like sewage treatment plants, there will be a large enough population to demand the treatment facility capacity and pay for it through taxes or water bills or some other mechanism. Aside from determining the demand for specific infrastructure and conducting CBA, that's cost-benefit analysis, forecasting or projecting the growth and spatial distribution of population allows planners to schedule the implementation, including stage development, of public works projects. We can figure out if a treatment plant will be needed. Will it be needed in 10 or 15 or 20 years? And depending on that need-by date, when should we start planning supportive infrastructure, land acquisition, and construction? While population projections help with determining the infrastructure level of service and scheduling, projections about the characteristics of population can help better zero in on the need for social infrastructure. Demographic projections provide guidance for housing, school, and recreation center development. This is particularly important for the National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity, 2016, which sets out the objectives and policies for providing development capacity under the Resource Management Act of 1991. It requires councils in medium and high growth areas of New Zealand to set minimum targets for sufficient, feasible development capacity for housing every 3 years. The population size and characteristics are critical in determining future overall land use, particularly in determining the type of commercial and housing land that will be needed to be zoned. This is determined by demographics. Things like how the economy is moving away from agricultural and manufacturing towards a service-based economy will have a big impact on how land is used in the future. To better ascertain how policies, changes in the economy, or how other events might impact future trends, population information is used to trace and assess the population and economic impacts of past events, proposed events, and possible future events. Detailed population projections are also commonly used to help set goals and objectives for short and long-range plans. We use the information to establish policy preferences for population level, composition, or rate of change. That is, to choose a desired growth rate, future population level, or employment level on the basis of community goals. Population also has a fairly direct relationship with tax revenue. So, if we want to have a good sense of what funding will be available for infrastructure, we need to have a good forecast, not only of how large the population will be when the infrastructure is set to come online, but also how much of that population will be paying taxes. Projections and forecasts are also used well beyond the planning realm. State grants to localities are often made on the basis of population or economic activity. We try to proportionally distribute benefits, so knowing where populations are is critical. It's also important for social benefits distribution and community aid. Forecasts are also commonly used as an input for many other types of analysis, including micro and macroeconomic modeling, health studies, business forecasting, and many other uses. Up-to-date projections of population are important enough to a broad range of local government purposes that many planning agencies make annual estimates. Typically, we put together two types of assessments. One is called a socioeconomic assessment. Here, a planner sometimes wants to trace a population implications or changes in land use requirements of an event, such as closing or opening of a manufacturing plant or office park. A contrasting approach to this is to determine what population levels should occur, what composition should occur, or what rate of growth is best. This is called a normative approach, and this approach asks, how many people can our environment, infrastructure, and land area sustain without unacceptable harm to the environment and quality of life? Finally, to be successful, sustainable infrastructure planning usually requires long-range forecasts. These typically span 5, 10, or 30 years, or even more, depending on the type of plan. Such forecasts are fairly straightforward at the national or regional level. Trends are somewhat stable as the scale and data are more readily available. However, in New Zealand, planners are particularly interested in small areas. This makes things a bit more complicated, as not only are data more difficult to obtain at this smaller scale, but the dynamics of small areas are much more volatile and difficult to predict. For instance, New Zealand has a pretty stable population that has grown at a pretty steady rate of just under 2% annually. This makes population projection pretty easy, and the projections can often be completed with a simple extrapolation method. But if we narrow in on a single neighborhood, projecting population for any amount of time becomes nearly impossible. Depending on the location, the number of people moving in and out of the area can be a much larger percentage of the population than we see at the national or regional level.